Heyo, you're tuning into Toasted Time, where I cook your time with some Reddit stories. Right now you're being toasted with some r/AskReddit, where lights turning green does not in fact mean that it is safe to drive. Our first question comes from Traditional C. The light turned green at the intersection and I started to move forward, but then the driver in the next lane to me honked and hit his brakes. And I hit my brakes too and looked around, and just then a car blew through the red light going 45 plus miles an hour. Had I continued through the intersection, my little hatchback might have been T-boned on the driver's side by a much larger vehicle. Thank goodness that the other driver saw the car about to run through the light and honked his horn, or I might have been flattened. This exact thing happened to me, except it was a dump truck. I couldn't see around the car next to me, but just had the feeling to not pull forward. Best advice I got is green means go, but not that it is safe to go. I always look both ways before proceeding on a green light. Do not trust other drivers. I was the third car waiting at a red light, and people always wait a few seconds on green because this light always gets ran all the time. First car in line is a little gray car. Lights have been green for several seconds, so they pull out. They get halfway through and a big dump truck full of gravel came flying through the intersection. Speed limit was only 25 and the guy had to have been doing damn near 40. Took the whole front end off, narrowly missing the cab. If they had been any farther through, it would have smashed right through the cab. Car got spun out so hard they went off the road and almost hit a nearby church. The driver in the car was talking to people who ran over to check on them. I know they left in an ambulance. I just can't understand why a dump truck has to be in that big of a hurry. Dude, you are a freaking dump truck, not a Ferrari. Calm the fridge down. I'm so tired of impatient truck drivers. Semi-trucks too. They need to teach patience in trucking school. And then we get yet another driving situation, not me, but two strangers. When I was living in a college town, my roommates were driving me to a store to get some beer, and it was dark out with not a lot of light for the street. These two people started crossing the street and were right in front of us as our light turned green. I honked at them and they got pissed off and stopped right in front of our car. The next second, a car came speeding past us in the next lane. Had they kept walking, they would have been hit by that car at about 40 miles per hour. Whoa. I never thought being a crappy pedestrian would ever be safer. If OP's light turned green while those two guys were still on the street, they crossed on a red pedestrian light. So if they hadn't been crappy, then instead waited for their green, they wouldn't have been in that situation to begin with. And then we get a harrowing story from Gibson Maestro, sudden cardiac passing away at work. Coworkers gave me CPR and paramedics got my heart beating again. It is a 5% survival rate. I ate a lot more ice cream once I was healthy again. Jesus, hope that coworker got some ice cream too. Happy you made it through though. Was the coworker CPR with or without AED? Thanks. Coworker got a t-shirt I made when I returned to work. CPR was without, but the paramedics arrived in under 6 minutes and they brought the hardware. One coworker called authorities and they gave him CPR instructions, which he gave to the coworker who kept my blood circulating. Oh, and yeah, I bought him a few drinks. And then we get a disturbing story from Murky Ad, my only example. We went to party at Paul Smith College, and my friend's favorite cousin was a student there. Bonfire, booze, and someone had the bright idea to bring out a snowmobile. I was gonna ride on it, but I had to use the bathroom, and I guess I took too long because he asked a different girl to ride with him. And she did. They were both passed away in like 2 minutes later. It was traumatizing. It blew my mind for a long time. Had I just held my pee in, I'm the one currently in the coffin instead of Christine. Got on the snowmobile on the frozen lake in the fog and went far enough out to hit that giant rock. And there is an article, I'm not going to read it out, so it appears that that is a true story. That is unfortunate. Continuing on, and then we get a little PSA at the end of this disturbing story from Axiomatic. Not me, but my father tells a story of driving along a bush road in Bougainville before the revolution there, and he was in the car with my mom, baby me, and my 5-year-old brother. There was a cardboard box on the side of the road blowing a bit in the wind, like an empty shipping box type thing, and he was going to run over it to amuse my little brother, and at the last moment he pulled away though, worried about there being something aside it. And as we drove past, he looked back in the rearview mirror and saw 2 little kids crawl out of the box and look after him as we drove down the road. I once ran over a paper bag, and I decided to go straight down the middle under my car rather than swerve into oncoming traffic, and I figured it would be fine as it was a paper bag. It turns out someone put a cinder block in the bag. I was lucky my transmission wasn't torn off. And then the PSA of today, never run over anything in the road when driving. And that is some words of wisdom right there. Anywho, continuing on. Now, we have another question from Sufficient Pay. A dude might be a 45-year-old family dad, but his hands can still knock you the fridge out. They have a lot of pent-up anger. Beware the fury of a patient man. I always heard it as old man strength. I think what's going on is that as you get older, you get better at using your body. So when you're older, you need less physical strength for the same effect, but you're also typically stronger than when you were a child, so you seem disproportionately stronger compared to a younger person. And then someone else learned that narcissism is easily mistaken for confidence. Can you give an example? I'm trying to learn to differentiate between these two. Narcissists believe that the world revolves around them specifically, which does mean that they act with incredible confidence, but being confident is not the same as being narcissistic. A very on-the-nose example is, a confident guy locks eyes with a cute girl across the bar. He walks over, maintains a polite distance, and compliments her and asks if he can buy her a drink, or something along those lines. Point being, he has the confidence to take the first step and make contact. He will also leave if it is requested or obvious if that is what she wants. A narcissistic guy will walk over, stand way too close, and talk about how she is obviously so into him, and generally make himself the center of the interaction, and is much less likely to respond to a dismal. Narcissism is a sort of overconfidence in your own image and personality. The belief that everything happens for you and not for everyone else. Also, when rejected in that scenario, confident person will simply say no worries or something of the like and move on. The narcissistic type will immediately look for flaws in that person and somehow try to make them feel embarrassed for the interaction, example, trying to claim that they were joking and not interested anyway, or flat out insult them for no reason. Source: my ex was a major narcissist. And then we get an interesting learning moment from the starting comment from Cap G, that if you don't treat her right, she will leave. Counter and addition to that, if you treat her right, she will still leave. And then we are hit with a story from Ice 8. That is what I'm going through right now. I wasn't a perfect husband, but I tried my best. I honestly believe that I did, and every mistake I made that ruined the marriage was something that I could have fixed if she told me how it made her feel instead of just saying nothing and letting their resentment and hostility towards me build for what I thought was for no reason. I don't know you or your story, but the way you describe the issue makes me think this might be helpful to you. To which then they link an article which I will be reading on Toasted Ideas if you want to check it out yourself, which you can go watch that after this video. Anywho, plug aside, again, depending on the situation, this link may be completely irrelevant, but I think it is worth a read for a lot of people. I mean, I get what you're saying, and there were a lot of things like that, but it's not an intentional act of defiance. In my case, it was stuff like leaving the cabinets open and forgetting to clean the lint trap after using the dryer, and I did try to remember those things, and the frequency with which I did went up after my soon-to-be ex-wife asked me to, but I'm human and I forget things sometimes. She didn't want to nag by asking me again, so she just instead said nothing. Saw every time I forgot as an intentional act and let the resentment gradually build up until it turned into something hugely out of proportion with all the small mistakes that led up to it. That article sounds like he is saying that it is his fault. And I mean, yeah, it is most definitely an interesting read, and it's a different perspective on marriage and the issues that might accrue from it. But once again, you're gonna have to hear my opinion on this on Toasted Ideas, so get on over there if you want to hear it. But if you don't, continue on then. And now for the final question from Logical Sweet. When I was about 5, I went through an entrepreneurial phase, and I used to go around picking flowers out of the neighbors' flower beds and then ringing on their doorbell and trying to sell them their own flowers. Not even picking neighbor A's flowers and selling them to neighbor B? Love it. I was thinking more mafia-like. Hey, here's some of your own flowers to buy. Would be a shame if I had to come back and have to say even more, wouldn't it? And then below that we then get a comment about selling stones. I used to clean up good stones and sell them by the mailbox, with most people saying, I can find them right here, why do I need to do that? Joke's on them, I am 40 and run a multi-location and omni-channel rock shop. One of my classmates in elementary was always trying to sell rocks to people. Cut to now where we're 40 plus and he owns a successful sand and gravel company. He spoke at a local high school graduation and basically said, I told y'all someday people would buy my rocks. The pet rock. Somebody made bank off that simple idea. And then we got like a weird Remembrance Day feng shui going on here, starting off from Mobetta Chetta. I was upset because my grandfather didn't want to play army with me and he would get weird about it, almost angry. Found out later he was in Vietnam. My grandfather had 30 acres out in the woods, and I'd typically spend 2 to 3 weeks with him and my step-grandmother each summer. We'd work on the various project classic cars, I'd get to use his riding lawnmower for everything, we used a pushmower at home, so this was a treat, have big fires, all the rural living stuff. But I could never figure out exactly why I wasn't allowed to have any kind of simple BB pew-pews or paintball pew-pews or whatever at his house, but could in my suburbia house. That is, until he sold the house and land when I was 14. Packing up his stuff, right there in a trunk, a Purple Heart medal and his fatigues from Vietnam. I knew about Vietnam. I didn't know about the Purple Heart. I still don't know the full story, but I do know he was a radio guy and had to discharge his pew-pew after getting hit. My dad is like this. We had pew-pews growing up and all of that, but they were used for hunting. Nothing else. Absolutely no toy pew-pews, water pew-pews, etc. When I got older, come to find out he had been in the invasion of Grenada. He's ashamed of what he had to do there and only ever used a pew-pew because it was how he fed us. And then we get a disturbing story from rural. I used to search for naked 18-year-old girls on Kazaa because, you know, I was 13 years old. It makes perfect sense to find girls in my age group. I'm thankful that the internet was so young back then because looking back on it, I am horrified. I could have gotten myself or my parents into a crap load of trouble. And now I'll have to teach my own son that while yes, being age appropriate makes sense, you can't do that. I knew a guy in high school whose father was arrested for having CP on his computer. An investigation was taken and the evidence proved that all the CP was uploaded while my father was out of town. It was his underage little brother that did that. My brother nearly ruined my parents' lives after downloading CP just because. Like, they would have been the ones to go to jail, not 13-year-old him. Thankfully, my dad monitored our computers before the FBI started knocking. Some children are just plain idiots and malicious. This is why I don't condone to send parents immediately to jail if their kids does something like this. At 10, I perfectly knew what was right from wrong. Oh, my brother is one of the worst people I know, lol. One time, he made up a story that my half-sister, his stepsister, let him finger her and spread it all around school. He has a lot of mental issues from being born prematurely, I think. But it is not an excuse to deliberately fridge up other people's lives. And then we get a story about an alarmed mother from Glittercorn 11. I was stuck on the inside of my own arm, giving myself hickeys. And I was bored one day in the bathroom and zoned out and came out with a huge bruise on my arm. In a public gas station. My mother was super frigging alarmed when she saw me, and I never realized why. I was just embarrassed to admit I did it myself. I did this once on the school bus ride home because I was bored, not realizing it was leaving marks on my arms. When my mother saw me, she was convinced I got the bruises from carrying too many books and bought me a new backpack that I could hold more books with. I never told her the truth. Well, look at that. We got two different reactions from two different mothers. Well, granted, one of the mothers was coming from a public gas station, which I understand being super alarmed at that rate, and the other one came from being at school. But, well, no, if it was coming from school, I'd say you should also be just as alarmed from that happening. But two different reactions from mothers. One of them is really alarmed, and then the other one is like, oh, you need a new backpack. Totally different. Anyways, well, that is about it for those stories today. But if you enjoyed, please like and subscribe to become a fellow bread bag. But aside from that, I post 2 new videos every day, so I hope to see you next time toasting session. But until then, have a good one.